Good afternoon, everybody. It's Grizzly from Lexington, Kentucky. Good afternoon. Do I have a special guest, VIP, backstage? Mark Anthony. Boy, do we have something lined up for you today. I think the information he has is going to blow you away. He's got a book out there we're going to talk about. Give some information. Make sure you purchase one. How you doing today, Mr. Anthony?
I'm doing great, Grizzly. Thanks for having me on the show. I almost didn't make it because of Hurricane Ian. I just got power back about an hour and a half ago. So apparently powers greater than us decided this show is going to happen.
That's right. That's right. If you could, give us a brief background on yourself.
Well, I'm Mark Anthony, JD, the Psychic Explorer. JD is my Juris Doctorate law degree. The media has also labeled me the Psychic Lawyer. And I'm a descendant of mediums. Both my parents, my mother and my father, and people for at least 3 generations before them, going back into the Victorian era, have all been psychic mediums like myself.
Wow.
Yeah, and so growing up in that kind of environment was pretty interesting. But the thing is, my dad was a U.S. Navy SEAL, and my mom was a commercial illustrator, and she was a fashion designer. So it's not like they were going around wearing turbans with crystal balls. These are just abilities that
Right.
they had. Yeah, I'm the first person that's really gone public I mean, people have known about some of the psychically gifted people in my family, but I'm the first one to go public with it. And I'm also a trial attorney. I've tried over 100 jury trials, represented probably close to 10,000 people throughout my legal career. But now I'm focusing strictly on my spiritual work. My first book was Never Letting Go. My second book was Evidence of Eternity, and both were spiritual bestsellers. Evidence of Eternity was submitted for a Pulitzer Prize, as was my brand new book, The Afterlife Frequency. Also, it was up for a Pulitzer, and it's been endorsed by the top afterlife research and survival of consciousness and near-death experience scientists, researchers in the world. And I'm known as the Psychic Explorer, Grizzly, because I spend a lot of my time traveling to mystical spiritual sites around the world, because I've always been fascinated with ancient mysteries and supernatural phenomenon, as well as near-death experiences, quantum physics, and of course I appear on TV and radio as a psychic medium and legal expert, paranormal expert, near-death experience researcher, and I'm the co-host of the Psychic in the Dock, which is every Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific on the Transformation Network with my amazing co-host, Dr. Pat Basili, and I'm a regular columnist for Best Holistic Life magazine. So those are a few of the things that I got going on. I'm usually pretty busy. This last week, I lived in Florida, and we've certainly been impacted very heavily by Hurricane Ian. And all the listeners, please keep the victims of Hurricane Ian, particularly along Florida's West Coast, in your thoughts, prayers. And if you can do any donation to hurricane relief funds to help these people. And I also understand South Carolina just got walloped by Ian too. It went back out to sea and recharged and did quite a bit of damage to the low country. So, this is what America is all about. It's people helping people.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you on that. And unfortunately, it looks like it's been pretty bad. Yeah. It really has been. And our thoughts and prayers go out to everybody. God willing and Godspeed for you all. One of the questions I have, let's talk about your book, The Afterlife Frequency. In Afterlife Frequency, you wrote about how is growing up psyche. Explain that for me.
I'm laughing because I was about 3.5 years old, and I start playing and interacting with my invisible friends. Now, at first blush, a toddler having invisible friends isn't that big of a deal, but when mommy and daddy can see and understand who I'm playing with, I'll remember mom saying, "Oh, he's got it," and dad's like, "Oh, geez, he's got it." So I had two very different reactions from my parents. But it was, for me, it was my normal. I thought, everybody's mommy and daddy were like this until I started school. And the thing is, Grizzly, I remember before I started first grade, and I started first grade right after I turned 5, and my dad sat me down and he said, "Mark, you don't talk about this to anybody except your mother and me, because people who see things that others don't get taken away."
Oh,
That really scared me.
yeah, I
And
can imagine that.
yeah, and to top it off, I went to Catholic school, which I thought, oh wow, angels and saints and all these supernatural entities that they were teaching us about in religion class. But I put two and two together pretty quickly that you don't talk about this. You only talk about their supernatural entities. Well, as I got older, Grizzly, I found out why my dad was so alarmed. He wasn't trying to be mean to me. What had happened about 20 years before I was born, he had 4 siblings, 3 sisters and a brother. And one of his sisters, Marjorie, also had the gift of mediumship and psychic ability, as did their mother, Isabel, and their maternal grandmother, Grace. So just on dad's side of the family, he had 3 generations there. And Marjorie, she was married to this guy who's a religious zealot, and I'm being polite when I say that. He did not approve of or like her abilities. And one day he was getting ready to go to work, and he was a machinist, and he worked at a steel factory, a steel plant in Pennsylvania. And as he was getting ready to go to work, Marjorie started getting these tightness in her stomach and solar plexus area. And she begged him not to go to work. She goes, "Something horrible is going to happen, please." And they got into a big argument. And he finally said, fine, I'll stay home. Well, what happened, Grizzly, is that day a crane was lifting thousands of pounds of steel beams, and the cable snapped, and it crushed the machine shop that he worked in and killed everybody there.
Wow.
So, yeah. And so if he had been at work, I mean, there's like a 99% chance he would have been there, unless he, was out doing something else. But he was terrified by the fact that she was able to see this. And so he conspired with an unscrupulous psychiatrist who diagnosed her as a schizophrenic. And they literally sent an ambulance with these guys in white coats. They removed her forcibly from her home, put her in a straitjacket, and then took her to a mental institution where she was involuntarily subjected to electroshock therapy for over a period of 6 months. And it did so much damage to Marjorie that she never spoke about seeing spirits again. And so when I was a teenager, I finally got the full story. And then I realized, well, that's why Dad didn't want me talking about this. And that's unfortunately been the case with psychic mediums throughout history, where we've been persecuted, we've been seen as evil. And the thing is, there's still countries in the world, in the Middle East, and you can figure out what religion I'm talking about, where mediums are beheaded in a number of these countries. So, we still have a long way to go. But the nice thing about the US, Europe, Japan, India, certainly Australia, and parts of the Latino world is that this is now becoming openly discussed. And one of the focuses of my work is the scientific explanation of all this. And so that's why I work with near-death experience researchers and afterlife scientists to prove that what we're doing is not only real, but that there's also an afterlife, and that it's all explainable through science, particularly through quantum physics.
Yes, you are correct on that. Now, with one of the things I always ask people, especially having abilities like you do, how was it with having parents that had the same abilities?
It was tough being a teenager. I couldn't get away with anything, because they knew. And I think all parents have that sixth sense. All parents kind of know when something's going on with their kids. But as I started getting older, I realized that mommy and daddy were different than all my other friends' parents. And I'd come home from school, and mom would be talking about a spirit that she saw that day, and I'd be sitting there eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Tell me more, and our conversations at dinner. My dad was of the Baptist faith, my mom was of the Catholic faith. I went to Catholic school, but we looked at God and the afterlife much broader than any religion, and so our conversations were always. I love them. I miss my parents being here in the physical world, because I really miss those conversations. But mom's, all right, I'll give you an example of what it was like.
Okay.
I was probably 9 years old, and my brother was 6 years older than me, and he was on the phone, and this is in the olden days before cell phones. And a friend of his borrowed his dad's car, and there's these three boys, and they were on their way over, and they were supposed to go somewhere. And I remember my mom, she was acting like my Aunt Marjorie had, and she was holding her stomach, and she goes, I don't want you. My brother's name is Earl. We call him Earl Joseph because my dad's also name is Earl. So, and then my nephew's name is Earl. So we got a lot of Earls, and my grandfather's name is Earl. So Earl Joseph is my brother. And she's like, I don't want you going. And I remember it was a cloudy day, and it was summer. It was a hot, steamy Florida day. And all of a sudden there's a knock on the door, and it's this neighbor girl named Patty. And Patty lived up the street, and Patty liked my brother. And Patty came over and said, Earl, do you want to go get some ice cream? And mom whips out a $20 bill, and she gives it to Patty and gets my brother and shoves him literally into her arms and goes, Patty, you go take Earl for ice cream. And they're like, all right, whatever. And so they left. And not 5 minutes later, Grizzly, this car, and I'm trying to remember the make of it because I was a little kid, but it was a big car. It was a sedan, had 4 doors, but it comes screeching up in our driveway. And there's these kids, and they go, hey, is Earl here? And my mom went out and said, no, he left with Patty. Maybe he can catch up with you tomorrow. And I could see this terrified look on her face. And I'll never forget this. It was cloudy, and then the drops of rain. You know how these big drops started hitting, and she goes, boys, please be careful. Yeah, we will. And they zip off, they take off. And I remember forgot my mom, she had real dark brown eyes, and they locked on mine. She goes, something bad. I just feel it. About a half hour later, these boys were going about 90 plus miles an hour, and they hit a telephone pole, and every one of them was killed. And, we live in a small seaside town, and it spread like wildfire. And I'll never forget that night. I heard through my parents' bedroom door, my mom sobbing. And my dad was trying to console her. And she said, why couldn't I have stopped it? My dad, and I remember my dad saying, Jeannie, he said, you tried. And I remember, and I could go on and on with other stories about this. I'll tell you another one.
Okay.
Years later, I must have been in college or law school. I'm trying to remember. I was probably about 20 or so. And my parents, I have to admit it, they like going to casinos. They just enjoyed that. And my dad took my mom to Las Vegas. And they were very excited. And the MGM Grand had just been built. And they were at Caesar's Palace. And then Dad said, let's go see this new MGM Grand. And they walked in, and it was very opulent. It's all done in a movie theme and all this. And mom started profusely sweating and she got dizzy, and she goes, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. She goes, this place, it's a tomb. It's a tomb. I can't breathe. And my dad knew that something major, mom was having a major psychic episode. So he said, all right, honey, let me get you out there. He goes, people are going to die. They're going to die, you know. And I remember they got back from Las Vegas, and my mom telling me this, she goes, we had a great time, but I hated the MGM Grand. It felt like a tomb, and I was hot and sweaty, and I couldn't breathe. Like a day or two later, she calls me and she goes, turn on the news, tell me what channel. There's a story on the news that a fire had broken out in a closet of the MGM Grand, and it burned a bunch of plastic and got caught up in the ventilation system.
Oh, wow.
And it asphyxiated to death like 50, I think it was 54 people. And exactly what my mother felt. She couldn't breathe. She was hot and sweating, and it was a tomb.
Wow.
Yeah. And so when people ask me, what was it like having psychic parents? It was always interesting, but there are times it was extremely intense. And I remember mom crying, why couldn't I have stopped it? And I said to her, what would you have said, and who would you have said it to? So let's say you went to the manager of the MGM and said, I think this is a tomb, and people aren't going to be able to breathe, and I'm hot and sweaty. They'd think that you were insane. And I had a premonition. It was in May of 2001, and I was out in front. My cousin worked at the World Trade Center, and I remember they wanted us to go up in the Twin Towers, and I looked up and I saw stuff falling, and I hunched over, and I was with my niece and nephew, and they were teens at the time, and like everyone's looking at me like, what's your problem, dude? I remember my niece, you know, she's my buddy. She goes, leave Uncle Mark alone. You know, she was always, leave Uncle Mark alone. And I said, I'm not going up there. I said, if something happens, you're trapped. And then, of course, 4 months later was 9/11. And
wow.
The thing is, and I had this discussion with my mother on several occasions, because we pick up on impressions, that doesn't always mean we can prevent it. Now, with Aunt Marjorie and with my mom and those boys, they were able to avert one person, which begs the question, was that interfering in destiny, or was that intervention predestined? In other words,
right.
What was Marjorie's husband, not supposed to be at work? Was my brother not supposed to get into that car? And then something like with 9/11, certainly what would I have said? If something happens when you're up there, you're trapped. Okay. But I remember I saw falling debris. It was like a flash. And that's how these visions, these premonitions are. And it was the same with my mom. She felt what was going to happen. And we've come to the conclusion, just because you can foresee something doesn't mean that you can prevent it. I mean, I'm certainly, if I do, I'm going to try. But in the situation of the MGM and with me with 9/11, who would we have told? And who would have believed us?
Yeah, I mean, you're right about that. And I can understand where you growing up with psychic parents that you couldn't get away with stuff, because I'm prior law enforcement, and they called me the human lie detector. My two daughters do. So it was kind of rough for them, and that's why I have an ex-wife right now, unfortunately.
Or fortunately, maybe you had to be with her to have your beautiful daughters, and maybe that was what that was supposed to be. Then you two grew together, had the children, and then went your separate ways. So, I mean, we always look back on, my relationship ended, and maybe it was supposed to at that time. And being in law enforcement, I've worked with a lot of cops. I used to be a prosecutor, then I was criminal offense. And, when I was criminal offense, they didn't necessarily like me, but, we would talk and have lunch together and all that. I don't know one first responder, one police officer, and my dad certainly in the military, or anyone in the military who doesn't trust your gut. And the interesting thing, the gut is, okay, here's your lungs and your gut's right here.
Right.
Well, in the gut is the solar plexus. And the solar plexus is the most complex bundle of nerves in the human body outside of the cerebral cortex in your brain. And it's called solar plexus because they radiate outwards like the rays of the sun. And it's being studied quite intensively. And the solar plexus in some neurological circles is now being referred to as the second brain. I mean, think about it. An octopus has 5 brains, to control, I guess, all the arms. And, they're actually very complicated beings and quite intelligent. They're at least as intelligent as a cat, maybe more, but it's a different form of intelligence. But other species have multiple brains to control things. And so in spiritual work, and this is part of what I discuss in the Afterlife Frequency, my latest book, is when you receive those impressions, those gut feelings, the reason you feel it in your gut is because of the location of the solar plexus. And so when you pick up on the feelings, I feel hot, or when I'm doing a reading for someone and a spirit comes through, I'll feel how they died, it's because the solar plexus is where you receive emotional impulses, impressions, and feelings of a premonition nature. The other psychic receptor area is behind your forehead. And so for the folks who do yoga, the solar plexus is the yellow chakra, and the indigo chakra, also referred to as the third eye, about 4 inches behind the center of your forehead, is the pineal gland in your brain. And the pineal gland is between the size of a grain of rice and the size of a lima bean, the most mysterious and one of the most studied organs in the human brain. And this is where we receive the visual, the auditory, and what I call the direct feed. So I may pick up on a spirit, feel how they died, feel impressions, and then when they start giving me names and dates and places and all that. So we have 2 receptor areas in our brain, and both of which have very high levels of electromagnetic activity. So, I mean, and like I said, there is a reason for psychic ability. It isn't hocus pocus. It isn't magic. There is a sound scientific basis, which encompasses not just quantum physics, but also human physiology. And that's what I find so fascinating about studying spiritual phenomena through a scientific filter.
Well, that's pretty awesome. Now, as a psychic lawyer, explain that. That's a lot of people don't understand that part.
Yeah, I was on this one show. It was, I think it was the ABC affiliate in Washington, D.C. on Halloween once. And they said, psychic lawyer, oh, this is our Halloween show. And I was like, well, can you think of anything scarier than a lawyer who sees dead people? But well, obviously I was born a psychic medium, and I was actually considering going into the clergy. But as I started, getting into my teens and getting older, I decided instead to go into law, because I felt that the clergy would be too restrictive with too many rules and regulations. I mean, go figure, it's talk about jumping out of the frying pan right into the fire. And when I went public with my abilities, I was in New York City, and this media outlet picked up on that, and they said, you're a psychic and a lawyer? And they go, Mark Anthony, the psychic lawyer, boom. And then it stuck. And, because people contact me all the time, what's going to happen on my case? And, find this and do this. And it's like, yes, I have helped the police behind the scenes. I was on the CBS TV show, The Doctors, and an Emmy award-winning show. And I did a reading for a family in a cold case, and information that I gave them led to the arrest of the killer. And there's been other situations where I've consulted with, been consulted by law enforcement. And people think, okay, you're a psychic lawyer, so you always know the outcome of your case. You always can tell the future. What people need to understand is that being psychic does not make one all-knowing and all-seeing. I'm not God. I'm a medium. I'm not the Messiah. What it does is it gives us insights. We can pick up on data. And so when a psychic like myself helps the police behind the scenes, certainly the information that I present, like, all right, let's say you were back in law enforcement and you consult me on a murder, and I said, okay, this is what I'm picking up, and you need to check this out. Well, you can't put me on the witness stand because that's hearsay. Hearsay is an out-of-court statement offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. And one of the filters or the standards to get around hearsay is cross-examination, where the opposing counsel, how do you cross-examine psychic intuition, much less a spirit? You can't. But what I can do is give you, as the law enforcement officer, direction, and that can lead you onto the trail, and through that, you will secure and find evidence which is admissible in court. So that's how we help, is behind the scenes. But I mean, I get all kinds of, crackpots contacting me about, we're fighting over the will in my family. Does my mother really want me to have her toaster? And, stuff like that. It's like, that's not what this ability is about.
Right. And I mean, that makes perfect sense. But don't most people think they're polar opposite professions?
They do. And they're really not. I mean, people tend to think, and look, I've got two professions, or throughout my life, two professions, a psychic medium and a lawyer. And whenever people ask about that, it definitely generates a response. And most people don't like lawyers. Why? Well, because when you go to a lawyer, when everything's wonderful in your life and you're happy, no, you go and you get arrested, you get sued, you get into an accident, you get a divorce, you're fighting over something. There's a dispute with land, insurance companies. Yeah, they're always fair and reasonable. So you go to an attorney when things are lousy. It's like, people don't like going to the dentist. Well, having a root canal is not a lot of fun, but it's important. And then mediums, people have, for outmoded, Bronze Age notions that this is the work of, Satan. I love it. One time, the guy wrote on social media, "You're doing the work of Satan." And it's like, well, how is it that and I wrote him back. I usually don't respond. How is it that I'm doing the work of a shiny silk-like fabric? I mean, look, no, he wrote Satin, Satin. I'm doing the work of Satin. He couldn't even spell Satan, so it's like, please. But the thing is, both jobs are about helping people. As an attorney, that's your job. You got to help people through some of the worst things they're ever going to go through. And as a medium, the worst thing anyone can go through is losing a loved one. And by facilitating communication with people in this world with their loved ones in spirit, the other thing is both occupations focus on evidence. My last book, Evidence of Eternity, explains, and certainly I went even further in the new book, The Afterlife Frequency. Both books explain that as a psychic medium, when I'm communicating with spirits, I have to bring forth evidence, facts, data transmitted to me from a spirit to guarantee, number one, who it is, the authenticity of the contact, the reliability of the information. Doesn't mean it's going to make sense right away. It may take time to think about it. And certainly an attorney needs evidence to substantiate his or her case. So both jobs are about helping people. Both jobs are about evidence.
Yeah, but, talking about that, what do you think about there have been occasions when the dual careers and attorney and the mediums, have they ever conflicted with each other?
I've always found that they complemented each other. But see, it's part of my skill set. People are like, oh, you must know if you're going to win. No, not necessarily, but it can give me insights. And like I was selecting a jury. I was a defense attorney at the time, and it was a case where these two big bruisers got into they got in a fist fight in a bar, and my client beat the daylights out of the other guy. So now he's the victim, and he filed charges. So here we are in court, and I'm sitting next to my big bruiser client and the victim's big bruiser, but we hadn't started evidence yet because we're at the jury selection phase of the trial. And jury selection is where you got to qualify a jury. You got to ask the prospective, what they call the venire, the prospective jury members. So they say there's 20 or 30 people, and then in this case, get down to 6 jurors and 1 alternate. But it was a crime of violence, and so I had about 30 people there, and I kept zeroing in. I kept getting a feeling from this one woman. So the prosecutor had finished asking his questions, and now it was my turn to ask prospective juror members, because the point of jury selection is to question prospective jurors to eliminate any bias. If somebody's on, in the stand, they go, well, I look at that guy and I think he's a crook, he's a criminal, then certainly he's got bias. Well, this one woman, I kept feeling this tightening around my throat every time I looked at her, and I kept feeling a female spirit connected to her. So I'm like, this is not the time to be making spirit contact. And then,
right.
But I knew there was some, and I kept getting drawn to her. And then the judge says, defense, so I get up to do my questions, and this tightening's intensifying, this female spirit's intensifying. And so I asked a question of the prospective panel: have you or has anyone in your family ever been the victim of a violent crime? Because this was a crime of violence. So I had to find out if anyone had any bias. Well, lo and behold, the woman that I kept getting drawn to, I see her trembling. And she looked like such a sweet person. And her hands trembling. She looked up at me, and tears just started rolling out of her eyes. And she said, about a year ago, my sister was in a foreign country when an escaped mental patient strangled her, chopped her up into little pieces, and threw her into a dumpster like she was garbage. Well, I'm standing here in court, and I'm all of like 27 years old, all right? And all I'm thinking is, they did not teach me in law school how to deal with this. And Grizzly, you could have heard a pin drop, because courts, even when there's always like the court reporter, the judge. It's like, and my client's like, dude, what are you doing? My client's like freaking out. And now I understand, because now I'm starting to get a visual on this woman's sister. And literally, I had a foot in both worlds. And if your listeners want to find out what happens, they're going to have to get my book, Never Letting Go.
And I would really suggest that. I really do. But, talking about your psychic medium and your work as attorney, have you have any other problems of conflicting with each other?
No, I've always found
when you're doing a jury draw and picking.
Well, it helps. It helps. Like in that case, I zeroed in on a woman who would have difficulty sitting on a trial that was a crime of violence. Now, obviously, it wasn't murder, and then the victim was a male, not a female. But it has made it difficult for me. I've turned away some cases. I decided during my practice that I did not want to represent child molesters or forcible rapists. They would come in, the ones that were guilty, and I could just feel this negativity. And so what I would do is I would refer them to some of my colleagues who specialized in that. And of course, they would refer to me things like that. Honestly, I preferred being a prosecutor. I always felt like I was doing the right thing. And because the job of a prosecutor is not to secure convictions, but to seek justice. And if you're prosecuting somebody and you find that there is evidence which can exculpate, find them not guilty, it is your obligation to disclose that to the defense right away. And I always made it a point to do that. And unfortunately, there's some rotten prosecutors who don't always do things like that. But I would say that unfortunately, it's like, you're a cop. There's bad cops and there's good cops. It's like with the George Floyd situation, what happened there, those police officers deserved every bit, in my opinion, as a legal analyst, to be prosecuted. That was completely. And when somebody is subdued and subjugated, get off their neck. You don't kill people. And certainly there are other situations where the police have to defend themselves. It is an absolutely difficult and very dangerous job. And when you're an attorney, it's, we come on the scene after the fact and put everything together. I want to talk just a second about George Floyd. I'm not getting into the whole political thing.
Sure.
But in my work as a near-death experience researcher, there are the new field or the expanding field in NDE research is known as shared death experiences. And what that means is somebody who's dying may start to see spirits that are coming to greet them as they cross over, and people in close proximity to them will pick up on that, people who are not in imminent threat of dying. There's also a phenomenon known as deathbed visions, which is exactly that, seeing spirits of people that who have transitioned. And I write about this extensively in the Afterlife Frequency, and George Floyd happened after I had submitted my manuscript, so now I include this in my lectures. And what happens with a deathbed vision is like hospice workers, healthcare workers, close friends, family members who are in proximity to the dying person, they start to pick up on and they'll see some of these spirits. But now in George Floyd's case, when the cop had his knee on his neck and George Floyd said, "Mama, Mama, I'm through." And I remember watching that, and it's terrible to watch it. It's just a horrifying thing. And it dawned on me, and so I did some research on him and found that George Floyd was very, very close to his mother, and she had died some years before. And so the theory that I put forward is that George Floyd, and maybe the most heavily documented deathbed vision in history, because all the people with the cell phones that were recording it, and he was saying something to his mother in spirit right before he died. I mean, it certainly is a fascinating hypothesis.
Oh, absolutely.
Another more recent deathbed vision, Betty White. Okay. Who didn't love Betty White? Okay. I mean, she was even a Super Bowl commercial. She was one of the Golden Girls, Mary Tyler Moore. I mean, she had her animal advocacy. I mean, Betty White was America's sweetheart. Died 2 weeks shy, I think, of her 100th birthday. And she died on December 31st, New Year's Eve of 2001. Well, she had a caretaker and her good friend, Vicki Lawrence, actress what was that show, Mama's Family? I still watch it on TV Land. It's just funny. It's hilarious. But Betty White had married a game show host. His name was Alan Ludden, and they married back in the 1960s. He died in 1981. And those two were like peas in a pod. And Betty White always said that Alan Ludden was the love of her life. And after he died, she was devastated, spiraled this horrible depression. And a deathbed vision is when a dying person will see the spirit or spirits of those who are coming to greet them. Just as Betty White was about to die, she opened up her eyes, looked up, and said, "Alan." And then she expired.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes. Yes, that really is. So, as your work as a lawyer got you interested in understanding how the brain functions?
It did, because not only did I practice criminal defense work, I started expanding my work in the law into the field of personal injury. And yes, I can hear the jokes now, oh, he chases ambulances, and then, people say, oh, a lawyer. And I say, yes, I chase stolen ambulances driven by drunk drivers who want to talk to dead people. All right. But But I've always been I've been fascinated by so many different things: science, biology, history, archaeology, theology, philosophy, all the ologies pretty much. I love it. And I have always been captivated by the functions of the human brain, which is the field of neuroscience. And so when I started practicing personal injury, I joined the National Head Injury Foundation, and I began taking on head injury cases. And then when I left the practice of law and I started studying the theories behind what makes people mediums, the basis of spirit communication, it all came together because I had a basic understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the functions of the brain. Because people say, well, you're not a scientist. It's like, yeah, but that doesn't prevent me from reading science books or medical books. I mean, I read medical books and I understand what I'm reading. I have protracted discussions with people like Dr. Gary Schwartz, who's the head of neurology, psychology, parapsychology, engineering, and surgery at University of Arizona. Dr. Eben Alexander, who wrote Proof of Heaven. Dr. Bruce Grayson, one of the founders of the International Association of Near-Death Studies. Dr. Pim van Lommel, who is Europe's foremost expert on near-death experiences. Colonel Dr. John Alexander, who used to be the head of IANS, International Association for Near-Death Studies. One of my good friends, Dr. Jeffrey Long, Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. We talk about this, and a lot of them have accepted my theory of the electromagnetic soul. And I started doing so much research, and I started also seeing a parallel not just between the science but also in faith. I mean, think about it, Grizzly. What is every great spiritual teacher, from Hindus of ancient India through Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Lao Tzu? I mean, you go through all of them, and they all talk about the who and what we are, the consciousness, the soul coming into the body, and then when the body dies, moving on. And we know from the laws of thermodynamics and physics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. From neuroscience, we know that the brain has an electromagnetic field. So I developed a 21st century term, the electromagnetic soul, to describe what we really are, which is pure consciousness, the who and what we are, which is eternal electromagnetic energy. And it's interesting because I've had some people say, well, I don't like that term because it takes the spirituality out of it. And recently, I was a keynote speaker at the Helping Parents Heal 2022 convention. And 2 days later, Dr. Schwartz from Arizona, University of Arizona, was speaking. And all of a sudden, he brings up the cover of my book, The Afterlife Frequency, in his presentation. And he said, Mark talks about the electromagnetic soul. He goes, which is a very spiritual term, because soul can be looked at as source of universal love. There you have it.
Oh, that's right. And you made a good point on that. But you're also known as a psychic explorer. Now, how did this happen?
The media apparently enjoys coming up with nicknames for me, but so far they've been positive. I've spent so much of my life. I always had a fascination with history, archaeology, ancient mysteries, and I've been all over the world. I've been to, Loch Ness, different places in Europe and Russia, Central and South America, Machu Picchu temples of Southeast Asia. And I love studying ancient mysteries and supernatural phenomenon. And so I started getting invited to be on a number of shows like this one, also on Coast to Coast and on a number of TV shows. And one outlet started calling me the psychic Indiana Jones, and then another just called me the psychic explorer. I mean, it's like, look at my office. I got all these artifacts and things that I've, acquired from around the world. And it's just something I've always loved. I have just always gravitated to this. And in fact, I was on Coast to Coast recently, and I'm scheduled for a number of appearances and interviews to talk about the curse of King Tut's tomb, because it's now 2022. Well, in 1922, 100 years ago, is when Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered, and I've always been fascinated with Egyptology. And after Tutankhamun's tomb was opened, dozens of people connected to the opening of the tomb and who visited it right after it was open started dropping dead from mysterious circumstances.
Wow.
And the media covering this, and it's funny because the archaeologist who found it, Howard Carter, he hated the media. He was rude. He was abrupt. He was a genius. He didn't want to answer stupid questions. But his patron, Lord Carnarvon, who was a British, was the 7th Earl of Carnarvon. In fact, Lord Carnarvon comes from Highclere Castle in England. And his great-great-grandson, the 8th Earl, no, he was the 5th Earl of Carnarvon back in the 20s. Now the 8th Earl of Carnarvon is in residence there. That's where they filmed Downton Abbey. So when you see Highclere Castle or you see Downton Abbey, that's Highclere Castle. And the Carnarvon family, the Earls of Carnarvon, are still they're still British aristocrats. And so Carnarvon, he liked the media attention. So he shows up in Egypt, because he's been the one bankrolling this expedition for close to 20 years and nothing had happened. Then boom, they find the biggest treasure trove of Egyptian, artifacts you can imagine. But he sold the rights to the story exclusively to the London Times, cut all the other media outlets in the world out of the loop. They're furious. So rumors start abounding when people started dying that there was a curse. And of course, people started dropping dead. And then Carnarvon himself, he's in Cairo, and I think it was in April of 1923. A mosquito bit him on the cheek, and he was shaving, and he cut it, got infected. He drops dead in Cairo. And when he died, all the lights in Cairo flickered for like a minute. Oh my, this gave the media everything they needed. So it's really a lot of fun to study these things. And I have just always enjoyed doing this.
It's very interesting you said that, because looking at your book, how is your book different from other mediums?
It approaches spirituality from a scientific basis, because I have a background in science, philosophy, quantum physics, archaeology, and it's accepted by the scientific community. It's not all this woohoo, spirit said this, spirit said that, the granola told me this, the granola told me that. I mean, I'm being funny here, but I see so many mediums being interviewed. Oh, I don't know how this happens. I don't know how it works. Well, I've spent the better part of my life studying this phenomenon, and I've presented plausible, credible scientific theories which are backed up by the research. And not only that, but it bridges the gap between the spiritual and the scientific. Take the term the electromagnetic soul. See, what's different about, or one of the things that makes the Afterlife Frequency different from other books by mediums, they'll focus on mediumship. They may talk about near-death experiences. They may talk about deathbed visions. But the electromagnetic soul is the basis. Understanding that is the basis for all the different forms of spirit communication, what I call interdimensional communication. In other words, it explains mediumship. It explains after-death communication, where people have a spirit come to them in a dream and it feels real, or they feel the presence of a deceased loved one around them. It explains the scientific basis for near-death experiences, shared death experiences, deathbed visions, out-of-body experiences, and reincarnation. It is the keystone for understanding all of that. And that's a part of what makes the Afterlife Frequency different, because traditionally, all those different phenomenon have been put into separate categories, and nobody's linked it all together before.
That makes a lot of good sense. Now, talking about the afterlife frequency, from my understanding, it does introduce new terms and concepts about spirit communications,
Right.
Which are based on science. One of those new terms you developed is the electromagnetic soul. Can you explain what that actually means?
Well, yeah, I just did. But the EMS. Well, we know that we know from science that everything is made of molecules, which in turn are made of atoms, which in turn are composed of electrons, protons, and neutrons. And they, in turn, are composed of the smallest particle, which is electromagnetic energy known as a quantum. That's where the term quantum physics comes in. Now, for the listeners who have a background in physics, yes, an electron is technically a quantum because it's 1/1800th the size of a proton. So now we covered that. All right. So everything on the subatomic level is quantum. And that means, Grizzly, you and me, the air we're breathing, the radio waves this show is being transmitted on, the surface of Mars, the rings of Saturn, and beyond. All right, everything on the subatomic level is the same electromagnetic energy. But everything in creation vibrates at different frequencies. That's why, this pen, it may be the same electromagnetic energy as I am, but on a subatomic level, it has a lower frequency because it's an inanimate object, but everything is energy. And so the electromagnetic soul theory, and I get into this in greater detail in the book, explains why during spirit communication that spirits are able to perceive future events, like my mother foreseeing the fire at the MGM Grand, how I picked up on the vision of 9/11. This isn't some woo thing. This is dealing with quantum physics. Why? Because on the quantum level, it has been theorized since the time of Albert Einstein. So Albert Einstein, Werner Heisenberg, Max Planck, Stephen Hawking, Carl Sagan, we're going all the way up to Max Tegmark at MIT, have all theorized that on the quantum level, time as we know it does not exist. And I was presenting this both at Helping Parents Heal when I was a keynote speaker there. And then a week later, I was in Salt Lake City at the International Association for Near-Death Studies annual conference. And I was a keynote speaker there. And I was explaining how on the quantum level, time doesn't exist. And I remember someone goes, well, that's really hard to wrap your head around. And it's like, you think? This is part of Albert Einstein's theory of relativity. And I don't pretend to completely even begin to understand the theory of relativity. I can understand different aspects of it because it is so incredibly complex. Think about what I'm talking about, that there is no time on the quantum level. That is to the theory of relativity as one grain of sand on the beach is to the beach. In other words, there's so much more to it. And I recall a story about Albert Einstein when he had come to the United States. He had fled Nazi Germany, and he was getting off the ship with his wife, and a reporter, the reporters are there because he was already Professor Einstein. And one of them called out, he goes, Professor Einstein, can you sum up the theory of relativity in a sentence? And Einstein looked at the reporters and goes, I have been trying my whole life just to get it in one book.
Unbelievable. Now, does your electronic electromagnetic
EMS, yeah.
Does that also, do you think, believe animals also have the souls?
Absolutely. It's only human arrogance that assumes that animals don't have spirits, don't have souls. And in spirit communication, it's not unusual for beloved pets to make an appearance. and sometimes they're not so beloved. I remember I was doing a public event, and I zeroed in on this one guy, and he stood up, and his relatives came forward. Then this horse came in, and I said, I see the horse trying to bite you, and I get that the horse and you didn't like each other. He goes, I hated that horse. And apparently the horse hated him. I mean, it was funny, and certainly in spirit, electromagnetic souls don't hold resentments, but what they do is they retain memories and personality traits, which they transmit to me so that we can understand them. But it was funny because the guy was laughing. He goes, I don't know what it was about that horse. It didn't like me, and I just didn't like him. And then I was doing another session once for this young lady. It was over the phone, and I start describing this dog, and she goes, oh, that was my dog. I had him when I was in junior high school. And I said, wait, there's another creature coming through. It looks like a gerbil. And I described the color, and she started crying. I go, what? She goes, I brought that gerbil home from school, and my dog ate it. And it's like, oh, well, that was awkward. It's like, well, they seem to be okay now, and the thing is, spirits can be funny. They can come through, and they will communicate very much like they did when they were in this world. So if they're real outgoing and boisterous, I call them the New York spirits. They're right in your face. I want to tell you everything. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Then there's the Midwestern spirits. Hi, good to be here. And I'm being funny there. But the thing is, if they all came through playing harps and oh, we're so happy, like the elves from Lord of the Rings, it would be. I can see how people say it's very contrived. But what they do is an electromagnetic soul, when he or she or they communicate in a group, they're transmitting personality traits. And oftentimes they will project to me images of what they look like prior to dying. So if somebody was 95 years old and in very, very poor health, they will usually initially come in looking like that. Now, what's fascinating is, what about babies? And, babies that communicate, let's say a baby that died in utero, or a baby that died very, very soon after birth, which is such a horrible tragedy. Horrible, horrible. They oftentimes appear to me as a star, a beautiful, like, glowing orb of light. And they let me know that that's one of their indicators that this was a baby. Also, that in this particular lifetime, they had not been tarnished or influenced by living in the material world. Because let's say a baby that had passed shows up looking 35 years old and sophisticated. Well, that wouldn't help anyone to identify that. But when I see a beautiful star, and then the baby begins to communicate with me, and they're not goo goo gaga. Once again, an electromagnetic soul, an EMS, is an immortal living spirit who has come into the body. So even the spirit of an infant or a child who died in utero is perfectly capable of extremely sophisticated communication.
Wow, that's very interesting. It is.
Yeah, it really is. And I do a lot of work with members of Helping Parents Heal, which is a beautiful organization dedicated to just that. And they refer to parents who've lost a child as shining light parents, because there was no term there. There's a widow, there's orphan, there's widower, there's terms for people who've lost spouses and parents, but there was never an accepted term like bereaved parent. But shining light parent means that the parents know that this child's light and energy shines forever and eternity, as well as in their hearts. And I think that that's just a really beautiful term. And they've been very accepting of my explanation of the electromagnetic soul. And so Helping Parents Heal is dedicated to helping and assisting parents who've lost children and also incorporating the use of interdimensional communication, in other words, spirit communication, legitimate mediums to facilitate contact between people here and their loved ones in spirit. And I got to bring up a somewhat amusing story.
Okay.
I was doing an online spirit communication event for helping parents heal. And there was one woman, and I got the sense that it was her son who'd passed. She said, yes, my son passed. And see, information that comes through, it's not always readily apparent to the person. Maybe it should be, but it isn't always. And sometimes people, when they're on the spot, aren't connecting the dots. And her son's spirit kept saying, Sparky the dog. Sparky the dog. No, 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 no. He never had a dog named Sparky. We never had a dog named Sparky. I received an email, and luckily all of Helping Parents Heal did too. Right after the reading, she went into her bedroom, and then she saw this stuffed toy, a stuffed dog that used to belong to her son. She took it from his apartment after he died. He had it from when he was a child, and he called it Sparky. Ergo, wow. Sparky the dog. And she goes, oh, I thought you meant a live dog.
Wow.
And I don't mean to laugh, but sometimes people just don't connect the dots. He wasn't talking about a live dog. He was talking about a piece of evidence. Now let's examine it after the reading. He's letting her know he is aware that she has the stuffed toy which he possessed since the time he was a baby. She took it from his apartment and she keeps it in her bedroom, specifically on her bed. That's what he was trying to tell her is, Mom, I know you got Sparky. I'm glad. Because people are like, no. And it's out. And that's one of the things I write about in the Afterlife Frequency is avoiding the no syndrome. Because a lot of times things come through and people are like, no. It's like, don't do that. Say, I'm not sure. Let me think about it. Because no creates an energetic field where you're slamming the door in the spirit's face and they back off. You want to keep that door open. If you say, I'm not sure, let me think about it, energetically, that doesn't slam the door in their face. Also, it can take hours, days, weeks, even longer for the full meaning of a message to make sense. For example, I get a lot of medical information about the client that I'm doing the reading for or about somebody close to them in this world. So, Grizzly, I was doing a session for this woman over the phone, and her mother's spirit came through, and I said, there's a younger male connected to you. He's on the child or nephew level. Looks like he's about 7 years old, but he's here in this world. And she goes, well, I have a nephew, and he's 7. I said, I'm feeling my eyes hurt, so that means there's something going on with this boy's eyes. And she said, yeah, my sister said that her son, the 7-year-old boy, he's having problems. He's complaining about like his vision, blurred vision. I said, and I start humming and singing Tutti Frutti, all Rudy, Tutti Frutti, all Rudy, Little Richard song. I go, well, does that song make sense? She goes, no. She goes, I know who Little Richard was, but I'm not a fan. That song means absolutely nothing to me. I said, that's fine. It doesn't make sense now. Just jot it down. She goes, that doesn't make sense. Don't worry about it. 3 weeks later, I get an email from her. She said she told her sister about the reading, and her sister said, I want to make an appointment to take my son to the eye doctor. Do you want to go with us? And so the client said, here she is with her sister, her 7-year-old nephew. They're going to the eye doctor. And the second they walked into the eye doctor's office, on the radio starts playing Tutti Frutti, All Rudy by Little Richard.
Wow.
Now, let's examine this. Clearly, the mother spirit wanted her to know she's around and aware of what's happening, not just in her daughter's life, but in her grandson's life. She knows that he had a problem with his eyes. She transmitted that to me, and this is what's known as another term I introduce in Afterlife Frequency, spirit intervention. A spirit is intervening on a medical condition, get the boy to the doctor. Now, they go step into the doctor's office, and the song they hear Tutti frutti, ah, Rudy. Now, how is that possible? Let's go back to the theory of relativity. On a quantum level, electromagnetic level, there is no time. Radio waves are a form of electromagnetic energy. Spirits can see what we consider to be the future. So the EMS, the electromagnetic soul, the mother, was letting us know this boy needs to go to the doctor, and to confirm that you're doing the right thing, this is the song that's going to be playing at the precise moment that you walk into the doctor's office. And the spirit can see this, number one, because on the quantum purely electromagnetic subatomic level, there is no time. And because radio waves are electromagnetic energy, she saw that that's the song that was going to be playing.
You know what? That's so amazing and interesting that people really don't understand that till actually it happens. It really doesn't. But looking at my notes, I have a note jot down here. It says one other concept you present in the Afterlife Frequency is the collective consciousness. And what does the collective consciousness mean?
Collective consciousness is fascinating. Think of your electromagnetic soul, okay? Now, neuroscience is completely at a loss to explain consciousness. The official position is that your brain creates consciousness through electrical impulses and chemical reactions. Well, logically speaking, the brain is essentially a carbon-12 resonator floating in salt water. Okay, that's what your brain is. Your brain no more creates your consciousness than your computer hard drive created Windows 11. In other words, it's merely the hosting device. Your EMS is independent of the brain. Consciousness is not a strictly localized thing. I mean, there's local elements to it, but it has a broader connectivity. So when we die, think of your EMS as a drop of water, and that drop of water leaves your brain and plunges into the sea of consciousness. In other words, it becomes part of the collective consciousness. And people think that when you're communicating with spirits, it's an individualized thing, one spirit per one person. But spirits are never alone. People are always like, are my loved ones alone? Absolutely not. Spirits, being pure energy, are linked to other spirits, linked to other spirits, linked to other spirits. That's why, in the case I gave with the Little Richard song, that spirit came through the collective consciousness, did a scan of the little boy. They knew that he was having a problem with his eyes, and in their infinite wisdom are able to not only tell them to get the boy to the doctor, but also what song's going to be playing on the radio the second they're there. So the collective consciousness is everything. Edgar Cayce, and I'm sure you're familiar with Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. For those who aren't, Google Edgar Cayce. Actually, this coming week, I'll be presenting at the Edgar Cayce Ancient Mysteries Conference, and I'm real excited about that. With the collective consciousness, Edgar Cayce called it the universal mind. There's other people in the spiritual field that talk about we're all cells in the body of God. So electromagnetic souls, when we leave our body, they become interconnected with this vast intelligence network. The question is this God?
Oh. That makes you really stop and think about that.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
Perhaps, perhaps we are all cells in the body of God.
The Afterlife Frequency has been endorsed by some of the world's top survival of consciousness and near-death experience researchers. And I noticed that. What is meant by near-death experience? And have you ever had a near-death experience at all?
Yes, I have. When I was 4, probably about 6 or 7 months after I started seeing spirits, I had an NDE, and I write about it extensively in the chapter on NDEs in the Afterlife Frequency. So I don't want to go through the whole thing, but suffice it to say, from age 4, um, I'd like to say I was never the same. It's funny because I've had a couple of NDE researchers. Did you have a life review? A life review. I was 4. What was it going to be? I liked this sippy cup better than that one. There wasn't a whole lot of life review, and it's funny. I said that to them. They were laughing about it because a life review, a near-death experience, is where somebody physically dies or is in a flatline state, and their electromagnetic soul separates from the body, and there's many different similarities all over the world and throughout time. They've been tracked for thousands of years, where people feel that they're going through a tunnel, a dark tunnel into a light, and when they get through the tunnel, they encounter spirits of loved ones who have passed. Then there's another phase where they go beyond that into a vast intelligence that even the word God is too limiting. It's pure love. And people that come out of it talk about a sense of interconnectedness, the feeling that interconnectedness, meaning that we're all one, not just people, but plants, and basically that we're all part of a greater whole. They talk about time doesn't really seem to matter. They also talk about losing a fear of death. They talk about reincarnation being a real thing. And this is fascinating because even in children or people that are atheists, one of my dear friends, Nancy Evans Bush, President Emeritus of IANS, she is close to 90, I think. She said that most near-death experiencers don't think there's a God. They know there's a God. And that's because people who have these experiences come out of it, even atheists, like, wow, there really is something much greater than us and beyond this particular life. So near-death experiences have been chronicled for thousands of years. One of my favorite stories is in Plato's Republic. Now, we probably all had to suffer through Plato's Republic or parts of it in philosophy and history classes, but near-death experiences, we're really convinced that Plato may have chronicled one of the earliest NDEs. There was a warrior whose name was E-R, and he was killed in battle. And the Greeks put him on a funeral pyre because that was their custom, to burn their soldiers. And just as the funeral pyre was getting lit, all of a sudden he comes back to life. Well, so they get him off there. And he starts to talk about this transcendent realm where he left his body and he went into this bright white light, and he met relatives, his deceased loved ones. And he said that we live many lives, but we drink from the river of forgetfulness between lives. So what he did is he explained all of the factors that we now know are with a near-death experience: meeting deceased loved ones, reincarnation, this transcendent feeling, this brilliant white light, a sense of interconnectedness. Now, here's what's so fascinating. None of that is in conformity with the ancient Greek religion of the gods living on Mount Olympus. Their view of the afterlife, and they did have one, was if you're good, you went to the Elysian fields. If you're bad, you went to the miserable parts of Hades. There was no reincarnation. There was no transcendent white light. This was a radical departure. So when you start looking at things like that, and Plato was describing this in terms and the vernacular that he was aware of in the Iron Age. But now when we can look at it, because we've had over half a century of applying the scientific method to this phenomena, now we know that near-death experience, and I could go on because I got a lot of ancient examples throughout history, but now we know that people have been having NDEs for thousands of years. And what happened was people would die and then they'd come back to life. And so this was a resurrection. And these resurrections, they baffled religious leaders and certainly the doctors of the time. In ancient times, they had some pretty horrific ideas of what medicine and how to treat things, but they didn't have any idea how to explain this. But now we do.
That's something else. In your book, The Afterlife Frequency, you actually explain the different forms of contact with spirits, such as through as a medium like you. And I think earlier you were talking about in the dream state or deathbed visions.
Right.
Now, near-death and shared death experiences are the proverbial I saw a ghost. Is there any common denominator between all these different forms of spiritual contact?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the electromagnetic soul. And that's what I go into is how the EMS is the explanation for all of this. Shared death experiences are really fascinating because there's a person who's dying, and then people in close proximity to that person experience what that individual is seeing. And the bystanders are not in any imminent danger or threat of dying. Now, how is that? Well, the bystanders have electromagnetic souls. Those electromagnetic souls have a vibration and a frequency. And as a person's dying, their electromagnetic soul is expanding because it's getting ready to lift off out of their brain. And those frequency waves begin to overlap. And that's why that's the scientific basis for shared death experience. And what's really fascinating, I know I use the word fascinating too much, but what's really intriguing is the life review. The proverbial, my life flashed before my eyes. It appears that as the EMS is leaving the body, there's this rapid review of one's life. And in shared death experiences, many people report observing the dying person's life review. Now, that must be something.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've experienced that on a couple occasions, because there have been times when families have called me to the bedside of someone who's dying, and I'll start picking up on spirits that are coming to greet them. And what's really noteworthy is that many of the family members and the hospice workers are picking up on these things too, and they're not mediums. And it has to do with the electromagnetic soul of the dying person. As it's in transition, it's emitting this amazing frequency, which the bystanders are all picking up on, or interfacing with, rather.
Well, I noticed that some of the people who claim that a medium can never make a connection for them, but some claim spirits of loved ones come to them, and others say that they never experienced the phenomenon. Why is that?
The no syndrome. And there's a lot of times, if you're trying to do a reading for someone, no. They're overanalyzing, they're hyperanalyzing, they're overthinking things. I was trying to do a reading for a guy, and he started off with, "Oh, you mediums can never do anything for me, but I want to try you." And I said, "Well, there's a mail coming through." He goes, Yeah. My father died. I said, "Something about Washington. Washington, could be Washington, D.C. No. He lived in Washington State. That's not it." Okay. I'm hearing Washington. And I said, "It could be Washington, D.C. He immediately interrupted me. No. He lived in Washington State. That's not it. You have to realize that communication with spirits isn't texting or instant messaging. What I'm doing is receiving electromagnetic impulses from the collective consciousness who is communicating with me from another dimension." Okay? So it doesn't tend to come across as a crawl on CNN. and maybe we will get specific pieces of information, and we all want that. But when you have someone there hyper analyzing, overthinking things, like I was doing a reading for this young lady, and she was way overthinking things, and her boyfriend had died, and his spirit comes through, and I get refrigerator. refrigerator. No, no, no. I go, come on, I just don't fling out random kitchen appliances hoping to get a hit. There's got to be something here. Well, he was a chef. Oh, so I'm thinking, gee, a chef. In every kitchen I've ever been in, there's a refrigerator, right? But I didn't say that. I go, okay, it was a chef. And she said, and he made this beautiful dinner for me, for us, and I froze it. And then he was killed in an accident. And since that time, every day I open up the freezer just to look at it. I said, well, there you go. No, it isn't. You didn't say freezer. You just said refrigerator. Now, by overthinking, hyperanalyzing, overanalyzing, she was creating the no energy block. She didn't mean to in her grief. Every refrigerator I've ever owned has a freezer. What she described was the same thing. She had a refrigerator with a freezer on it. And because I specifically didn't say freezer and just refrigerator, she no. And that created a block, and the boyfriend spirit backs off. Other times, people, when the contact occurs, they initially think it, but then they start, oh, that can't be it. This must be my imagination. This must be a grief-induced hallucination. So in the Afterlife Frequency, I explain how to get around the no syndrome, how to deal with it, and I give some exercises and explain a technique how to not do that to yourself. Because a lot of people are like, well, I want a spiritual experience and I want it now. And it's like, okay, the I want, you're creating another block. This is not an on-demand service.
Right.
You've got to be open to it, invite them, and then allow it to happen. And then there's other people that are constantly interrupting. What does he look like? What's his favorite sandwich? What was it? It's like, the spirit is not on the witness stand, and we are not cross-examining the spirit. So don't interrupt the medium. And I explain how to approach a reading with a medium, because some people are very demanding, some people are very negative. And what that means is they're grieving and they're upset. I understand that. But maybe spirit communication is not for them. But if it is, then please read the Afterlife Frequency so you can avoid the no syndrome.
That makes a lot of sense, because I can see that actually interfering with the preview and everything. But, talking about your book, how does it deal with issues like homicide?
Oh, it goes very deeply into homicide, people who've lost loved ones to murder, to homicide, spirits who have, when they're in material form, had been murdered. And it explains what it's like for the survivors to cope with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. I also explain military personnel that have to deal with PTSD. And, once again, this is different than books written by other mediums, because, I'm not just an attorney. I was a prosecutor, criminal defense lawyer. I've tried everything from marine violations to, premeditated murder charges. I've been in the trenches. I've had, with all due respect, some of my colleagues, they're kind of in this whole airy-fairy, oh, let's raise our vibration and the whole world will be happy. And I remember somebody saying that to me. I said, so if we send happy thoughts to the terrorist group ISIS, they're going to stop beheading and executing people? I'm sorry, but I've sat across the table, and I'm sure you have, Grizzly, from homicidal maniacs who were thankfully restrained. I remember one guy said, if I weren't restrained, I'd slit your throat. And he meant it. All right, so a lot of these people don't have that type of background. And I'm not bragging about it, because it was pretty darn terrifying, but I had a job to do, and I had to do it. And I stepped up to the plate, and I put, my feelings to the side. So it is, there are not words to describe what it is like to have a family member murdered. And the Afterlife Frequency goes into a number of situations and gives you a glimpse and some coping skills, coping mechanisms. because grief is hard enough as it is. Grief is a lifetime journey. But when that's coupled with a brutal murder, this is not something anyone is ever going to get over. This is a lifetime journey that you're going to go through.
Right.
But there are things you can do to help lessen the severity of it. I was part of a mental health summit, and one of my colleagues said something very profound. He said, everybody has PTSD to some extent, to varying degrees. I mean, anyone who's seen a loved one die. I mean, I watched my father draw his last breath. That was not easy. A child who loses a pet doesn't have the skill set that, okay, yes, we had this dog in our family. It was only going to live 15 years. And I came along when the dog was already 8 years old, and, that type of thing. And I'm not downplaying that, but everybody has some form of PTSD. What about somebody that's been physically or sexually assaulted? That leaves a scar. And these are the type of things that must be confronted and have to be dealt with. And the Afterlife Frequency does deal with that, at least from the homicide perspective.
You said the Afterlife Frequency helps people develop heightened sense of spiritual situational awareness. What is a spiritual situational awareness mean?
My dad was a Navy SEAL, and he drilled into my brother and I and my sister spiritual awareness. All right, 360. All right, you're a cop, Grizzly. When you go out to a restaurant, do you ever pick a table where you can sit with your back to the room?
Right.
You never do you?
No.
You want to see what's going on.
Yep. I want to see what's coming through the door.
All right.
I want to see what's on the floor.
You're a cop. Tell everyone, and this will lead into my answer. What is situational awareness?
Well, you have to know what's around in your background and what's going around in your scenery. And a lot of people go around life blind.
Yeah, they do. People they'll stumble into something, when you can avoid. I mean, I see it all the time. And I was always raised to be street smart and alert and aware. I remember my dad, he was a Navy SEAL scuba diver. I found out like a year or two before he died, he even dove with the legendary Jacques Cousteau once.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And my brother, and I remember hearing something about that. And my brother said this is before I was born. My brother was like 5 or 6, and dad took him to the dive shop, and he goes, yeah, there was some guy with this weird accent. And then my brother goes, it was Jacques Cousteau. And, but dad always said, before you get in the water, before you get in the ocean, look around. You want to see what the currents are doing. You want to see if there's some rocks, because you can tell what the water's doing. Check out the ocean. All right. So I'm 16 years old, and I grew up in a beachside community. So I walked down to the beach, and the ocean was perfectly calm and flat. Bunch of my friends were there. Bunch of these girls I knew, they had a big, blanket and umbrella, and some of my guy friends were hanging out there. And the beach was crowded. I mean, there were 100. It was a hot summer day, and the ocean was like glass. And I wanted to go jump and dive in the water because I was hot. And I stopped because I could hear dad saying, always check out the water. And I'm looking around, and all of a sudden there's a crowd of people, and I see this huge dorsal fin come up right next to him, and behind it was the caudal fin. And I knew that this was a shark, and it was a big shark, because there had to be about 6 or 7 feet between the dorsal and the caudal fin. So this thing was easily 8 or 9 feet long. So it comes up, and then they go down like that. And there's people everywhere. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm looking around, and I am the only person on the beach who saw it. And I remember my heart was pounding. And so I walk down to the water's edge. And I'm like, everyone, calmly get out of the water. People are staring at me. Why? Look, when you're in the ocean and someone walks over and says, get out of the water, don't sit there. Why? Get out of the damn water. Okay.
Right.
So I'm like, everyone, please get out of the water. And the people are shooting me birds and telling me all sorts of, things that rhyme with duck and all this, and I'm like, you really got it. And all of a sudden it comes up again, and now everybody sees it. Somebody yells shark. They start screaming. It's like that scene in the movie Jaws where everyone's running out of the beach.
Right.
And now the shark is, because they respond to vibration, now it is moving erratically. So I'm running down the beach, going, get out of the water, the shark. And like there's all these people following me, and this thing's cruising, and it's only about 15, 20 feet off the shore. This is like where everybody is. And so hundreds of people are running out of the beach. And I remember these two big bruisers. These guys are huge, and they picked up pieces of cocaine and let's throw it at it. And I remember I jumped up one of them, I grabbed his hand. This guy could have bent me in two. I mean, I'm tall. I'm 6'1" now, but this guy was like 6'4", and his arms are like, this. And I grabbed his arm and said, don't you do that. And he looked at me, and I said, if you do that, you're going to make it angry, and it's going to be erratic, and it could kill somebody, and it's going to be your fault. He goes, I didn't even think of that. I go, it belongs there. Okay, let's just warn people. And he goes, all right. So now they're running on the beach with us, and we got everybody out of the water, And I'll never forget, in the Afterlife Frequency, there's another story about a shark, which is actually quite a bit more intense than that one. But having lived on the ocean, I've encountered these creatures many times. And one of the things my dad instilled upon me is, they're not monsters. They have a purpose. They're an integral part of the food chain. And all right, for all your listeners, I bet you too, I love Shark Week. All right, and when Shark Week's on and Discovery and all that, I'm always going back to Shark Week. There's something about these creatures. They bring up the mysterious, the unknown, the powerful. And when you look at how they have evolved, these beings have existed from estimates 400 million years. They were alive when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and they survived the extinction of dinosaurs. They have an incredibly sophisticated neural network, and they're able to pick up on vibrations. They're the ultimate predators. Talk about an apex predator. So that situational awareness is when you go into any place, any situation, you look around, exactly what you said, Grizzly. You be aware of your surroundings. You know what's happening. Well, do you think being aware of your surroundings is just what's happening in the material world? No. Being spiritual situational awareness. See, situational awareness involves 3 dimensions. What's happening with you in 180 to, 360 degrees, what's going on around you. But spiritual situational awareness is also fine-tuning your innate ability to detect messages from spirits and pick up on the presence of spirits. And that can save your life, because spirits are never here to control us, to frighten us, or to harm us. They're here to present guidance and messages of love, healing, and resolution and protection. And like my Aunt Marjorie, she had the heads up about her husband, and she was spiritually, situationally aware. My mother, with the boys in the car, spiritually, situationally aware. Because once you start trusting those feelings, those energetic impulses from spirits, it can save your life or the lives of other people.
Yeah, absolutely on that. Now, the Afterlife Frequency, who would benefit most for reading that book?
I think anybody who is interested in understanding that life in the physical world is not the end, that there is an afterlife, there is a heaven. There is, dare I say, God. I think people who are interested in near-death experiences, and I believe people who want proof from a scientific perspective, that it isn't just wishful thinking or that's my opinion. People who are hopeful and want to know that life exists beyond the physical. And I have to say, anyone who really likes a page turner. I suffered through so many boring books in the practice of law and in law school, trudging through that boring, and it was important material. But yes, I talk about science, but I make sure that I introduce my concept and then I illustrate it with stories that are going to keep you on the edge of your seat.
Well, in reviewing everything, if you had a spiritual message for the world, what would it be?
So 5 points. God exists. Heaven, the afterlife, whatever you want to call the existence beyond the material world exists. That our electromagnetic soul is an immortal living being, that we can communicate with electromagnetic souls, and that we'll be reunited with our loved ones in the light when it is our time to leave this material world.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to the guest or to the world while I have you for a second?
Well, if people want to find out more about me and my work, please visit my website, which is afterlifefrequency.com. I invite you to sign up for my newsletter. It will also have a tab there for anyone who wants to schedule a telephone session with me. Phone readings are just as accurate as in-person readings because electromagnetic souls move at the speed of light. Also, I invite people to subscribe to Best Holistic Life magazine by going to bestholisticlife.com. But you can find out about all of this on my website, The Afterlife Frequency. I've got a lot of events coming up in this year, and certainly we're booking events in 2023. So I'd like to invite you all to visit afterlifefrequency.com, just like my book, The Afterlife Frequency. And Grizzly, I can't thank you enough for having me as your guest. I've really enjoyed working with you, and
absolutely,
it's been an honor. Thank you.
Now, where can they actually purchase the book at?
All fine bookstores, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and go to my website, afterlifefrequency.com. You can purchase all my books through my website. They're on sale worldwide and all on audiobook as well.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Anthony, JD Psychic Explorer. I told you we'll have one heck of a show today. I'm telling you, what do you expect? That's a lot of information that I didn't know about that I learned, and that makes me want to rush out and buy his book ASAP. And I suggest you do the same. But if you want to reach out to him, he gave you connections and ways to do it, please do so. Let's make sure and follow him and stick with them. Sign up for his newsletters and everything. If you want to be on my show, all you have to do is email me, Grizzly, the paranormal at gmail.com. Once again, Grizzly, the paranormal at gmail.com. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, at that time of the afternoon, coast to coast and around the world, it's that time we must say goodbye. I'll be live here shortly within the hour with our next guest. But until then, Mr. Anthony and myself, we say good day, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for tuning in.